everyone, may peace be on you all, and welcome to another episode of I'm a Muslim and That's Okay. And I have with me the whole Muslim segment, and with me is Dr. Sameena Zahoor. How are you, Dr. Sameena?
Hi, Shella. Thank you for having me on. I'm doing great.
I'm so happy to have you, and I don't just have you just because you're a doctor, which is fantastic. You are a family practitioner, but the wonderful thing about Dr. Sameena Zahoor is that you are a foster parent, that you have fostered, mashallah, like two children of your own, if I'm not mistaken, and that you have started the Muslim Foster Care Association, which helps Muslim children in the foster care system be placed with Muslim like foster parents. Please do tell us about how that all of that came about for you.
Sure. So I wanted to just preface to just get our listeners caught up about what foster care is. So
Mm-hmm.
foster care is a state-initiated temporary placement for children who can't live with their families for reasons such as possible abuse, drugs, financial reasons, maybe the death in the family. And this is really meant to be a temporary placement where kids are placed in homes while the biological family, is getting the resources and help that they need to then be able to have that child come back into a safe and nurturing environment. So, my husband and I actually got involved in foster care in about 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Our imam, a local religious leader, had given a talk about the need for Muslim families in foster care. And as most communities, we were sort of under the impression that as a Muslim community, we were immune to this, to having
Right.
children from our community going into foster care. And it was a big time for us to, I mean, it was really eye-opening for us to learn
Mm-hmm.
about how many children actually from the Muslim community were entering foster care with no Muslim families to host them. And so my husband and I decided in 2011 to become licensed foster parents.
Oh,
It took us about
wow.
6 months to a year to go through the licensing, the home visits, the paperwork, the vetting. And then in 2012, we welcomed our first foster son, who's about 5.5 years old. And really, he was placed with us for actually several years before
Oh,
he,
wow.
yes, it was actually a longer process. And during that time, as with any new venture that you take, you look for people to reach out to. And I found that there really was very few of the foster parents. I mean, we had started off with a
Especially in the
cohort,
Muslim community, because for
very low.
most people who may not be aware, um, even though we have it in our scripture to take care of those children, especially who are orphans or who are needy, but there is a certain degree of, I guess, misunderstanding that creates taboo around the subject. So yeah, I can imagine it must have been very hard to find support from other Muslim families that were also fostering.
We actually, started off with a cohort of, maybe 50 people, and
Hmm.
out of that, only 2 or 3 families got licensed. Actually, when they
Oh,
went all the way
wow.
through, because it is a pretty intense, a little bit invasive process. But you have to understand, if God forbid your own children were taken out of your home for a reason,
Hmm.
you would want them to be in a home that's safe. And so that
Right.
vetting process can be quite invasive. And as a community, we're a little bit shy about having things really, pried into home
Right.
visits, and you have to really, really lay out all financial family history, and
Hmm.
so not everybody is willing to really to go through that scrutiny. And so in that process, I was able to find Rania Shabib, and
Mm.
she was actually getting ready to welcome a refugee foster child into her home. And through our experiences, we really connected and bonded. And even though the awareness campaign, we were involved in panels, going to different communities to try to increase awareness in the Muslim community, really is still facing a lot of those barriers that you had
Right.
mentioned. One, lack of awareness that there's Muslim children in the foster care society, in the foster care system. Two, misunderstanding that you're adopting a child and taking them away
Right.
from their family.
Right.
Three, of course, the mahram issues, or the male female interaction, gender.
Right.
concerns that Muslim families have when you bring a child into your own existing home.
Mm-hmm.
And Rani and I realized that we really needed to address these issues. And so as we were doing these panel discussions and having discussions, we realized there was no organization that was addressing this. There were other Muslim organizations that had sort of had some educational involvement in the communities, but nobody was really tackling this very, very and growing need. This is not something, unfortunately, as I said, we as a community are not immune to drug abuse, to child abuse.
Exactly. That's what you've said, that good and bad families exist in all communities. That's a given. And our children have to be protected. And not just that, but there are so many Muslim refugees that do enter into the US. And a lot of sometimes, I mean, not a lot of, but there are times when there are children coming in without parents. And that's the thing. Ideally, it would be that they should be placed with Muslim families, but if there aren't any trained foster parents, where would they be placed? It would be placed with other families. They would be Muslim, not Muslim, or for any other faith. You don't know.
So you brought up a very important distinction. So there are two types of foster children. There's domestic foster children, and those are children within your community that are in homes that are taken out temporarily for a reason, and then placed back. And then the goal is always reunification. And then you have this other group, subset of foster children that come from other countries that come without, they call this the unaccompanied refugee minors, and they come without their parents, and so they have an even greater challenge because they're coming to a country with a different culture, different language. A lot of times, if these children were in refugee camps, they have lost a lot of formal education, and so there's a lot more challenge for them, and it takes a different set of fostering, because these children really will stay with you. Refugee foster children will stay with you until they reach independence, and then once they reach independence, then they're transitioned out, which is a whole other challenge in and of itself. And as an organization, we really are trying to address both sets of children. So initially, when we started, we were a little bit more focused on the domestic children. We obviously did also include whoever we were aware of in the refugee unaccompanied minors. We did include them. We started off with an Eid program. As your listeners may or may not know, as Muslims, we have two major religious holidays: Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, and a lot of the agencies, they're very good about, because they have collaborations with churches and things, to have presents during Christmas and Easter, but we realized that, and the reality is, Shahala, unfortunately, even despite our efforts and despite our awareness campaign, the majority of Muslim children in foster care are in homes of other faiths. And as a community, we have a long way to go to bridge that gap. But as an organization, we are trying to at least provide that resource and that some kind of assistance when the children are identified that they're Muslim.
And here's the thing: it's not my purpose to say that just because Muslim children are placed in homes that are of other faiths, that it's a bad thing per se. The primary goal is to keep the children safe, but ideally they do come from a very specific cultural practice background, and it is I think better for the well-being of the children to exist within a safe space that they are familiar with, that sort of thing, and then have also like the protection of a foster parent. So that's the basic premise of this, and that's why I think what you do is so important. If I could step back and just look at it as a perspective of fostering, when like a parent or foster parent decides that, yes, I want to foster a child, be it Muslim, not Muslim, irrespective of that, and they get the training for it, what are the things that they do have to still keep into consideration before they step into this?
So foster parenting is very different from parenting your own children.
Right.
You have children that have come from different backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
They may be raised, even if they're coming from a Muslim home, raised very differently, have
Right.
different levels of faith, and we have to
Right.
understand that not every child coming in as a Muslim may be practicing even.
Right.
But as a foster parent, these children need extra care, extra time. So
Right.
I had 3 boys of my own when
Oh,
I
wow.
welcomed my first foster son, and even though I went through all the training, it's not until you actually have the child that you realize that there's so much more that you need to know and be aware of. And so understanding that just like your children's siblings fight and argue, there's going to be fights and arguments between your foster son and your children. Trying your best to make sure that you are giving your children also attention, because sometimes that new child, when they comes in, just as if when a parent has a new child, born into their family, all of a sudden that child takes on so much more attention. Understanding that there may be issues that come up with your children when you take in that new child that you may not have foreseen. And children who are regularly independent, doing everything, they may be regressing because they're missing that extra attention, that's being taken. There may be a little bit of resentment that who's this child that's getting all of this attention. And when I welcomed my first foster son, my friends were giving gifts and and so my kids were like, well, what's so special, that he's getting all these gifts and just again, with the rules that you have in your home, understanding that a new child coming in who hasn't been raised with your rules, it's going to take a little bit longer time to adjust. Then your children also, again, say, well, how come he doesn't have to do this and we have to do this? And so that was the biggest adjustment, I think, for my children and for my relationship with my children and my foster son. And it really, if you think it takes a village to raise your child, it takes a even larger, more extensive village to raise a foster child. And I realized the importance of that. And I had friends that initially, just like when you have a child, they would drop off food and try to help, because literally that child is dropped in your home with just the backpack and whatever fits into the backpack. And so you have to, pretty much figure out schooling, what do they need as far as personal items that they need, what are their emotional needs, right? We're not given we're giving some information, but until you get that child, you don't understand the extent of the environment or background that they've come from, right? So dealing with that, I remember my first foster son, he cried for hours every night, asking for his mom, right? And really not understanding why he was taken away, regardless of from the outside of how bad it might have looked. He didn't understand. That was all he knew. And so, trying to come up with creative ways of consoling. And I remember we said he didn't want to sleep in the bed. And so we set up a small tent in my son's room, and I slept outside the tent. And so he'd have his own safe space, because you lose so much when you are placed in foster care. You're taken out from one home, your home, into a completely, new environment. And so, and every child is different. I've welcomed, 3 foster children to my home since I started. One was for several years, and then one was a set of teenage twins that I had for about 6 months. And each child is different, just like each of your children are different. Each foster child is different. Their needs are different. Just because you've fostered before doesn't mean you know exactly what the next foster child needs. So in terms of expectations and things to keep in mind, one, do you have the time to devote to that additional child? Okay. Is your family structure stable so that when you have this disruption, is there a healthy environment there that can adapt to this? Do you have outside help? I wouldn't, just like you would tell a new parent before a new child is on the way, if somebody was pregnant, who's your support system? Who is your support system? Do you have, my sister would help with pickup, drop off. I talked to my local Islamic school about enrolling my foster son in there. I had one friend who helped with, tuition for the Islamic school. I had another friend that would come and pick my foster son up and take him to, museums and the park, and
Oh, that is so
things that you don't
fantastic.
always have time to do
Right,
yourself. But
right,
that's what you have to sort of create if you want that child to have a nurturing environment,
right,
and then provide just more than just shelter and safety,
right,
right? And what you realize is these children are craving for that because that's
right.
what they, are missing. But despite all the things that you think you're giving to that child may not still want to be in foster care. And that's
Oh, yeah,
a
yeah.
consideration, right? I mean, you
Right,
think you're doing so many things and giving them so many opportunities. At the end of the day, they just want to go back home, and trying to take your ego away
right, right.
from that, service that you're providing, that you're not doing this to expect anything back from that child,
This
is
is
so
not a
important.
favor per se on the
No,
child.
no.
You've signed up for an obligation and you're fulfilling that obligation. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what people need to remember. I think the second part is, and it sort of ties into this, when the child has to leave you, either to go back to their biological parents or to another set of parents. How is that? I can't even imagine. But I mean, you've experienced three such scenarios.
I've been fortunate in that I've had some contact,
Mm,
after even them being taken back. And I will say that even though you may not get something directly
mm-hmm.
back in the form of somebody saying, "Oh, wow, thank you, amazing,"
Right,
you do see the benefit, and when that child grows, and if even some of what you sort of helped to foster, um, in some independence or strength, or
mm-hmm.
learning, getting caught up with school, when you see that benefit, then that trajectory, sending them in, just a small trajectory change can set off a child in a completely different direction. It is very gratifying, but it
Right,
takes, you may or may not see it. And I think
right,
that that's what you have to go in with, and as Muslims, it's an obligation on a community.
right.
And if nobody's fulfilling that from the community, that's a sin for the whole community.
That's a sin for the whole community. I firmly believe that. And then, like, bringing this back then to the Muslim community and what you, through the Muslim Foster Care Association, work so hard to bring awareness to. Um, we've got barriers. There's no doubt about that. We've got a lot of taboo around this because we do have gender separation. When you have, like, in your own biological family, it's different. But if you have, suppose, a foster child that is coming in and they're going to be of the opposite gender from either one of the parents, that's generally one of the main concerns of it, that there is a certain level of distance and privacy that sort of comes into play in all of this. So what I wanted to ask is that how do you, like, sort of get through to the Muslim community in those sense, that how is it that you are breaking down barriers to help bring more people, more like foster parents, to be able to foster more Muslim children?
So we worked very hard to recruit our local imams and
Mm-hmm.
religious leaders, and we actually, the American Fiqh Council actually
Mm-hmm.
came out with a paper
Mm-hmm.
about fostering and the
Mm-hmm.
importance of it. And we try to provide practical ways to navigate that. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
have 3 boys, but as
Right,
you said, bringing in boys is easy for my boys and my husband. But
right,
for me, when I was around my older foster sons, I would put a hijab on.
right,
And I tell, and people go, well, that's so restrictive, and how do you manage? And I said, you know what, the upstairs was completely private for me.
right,
Nobody was allowed upstairs. The
right,
first floor, when I came down, I put on a hijab. But I do the same when my kids' friends come over. It's
right,
no
right,
different. We welcome my son's friends over all the time. They
right,
come over, they stay over. So the same level of, I mean, I think of it that way.
right.
And yes, it's a little bit more, it can be, it's more of a daily thing as opposed to just occasionally. But
Mm,
after a while, it just becomes routine.
right.
And, that level of, that this level of respect that brings
Mm,
to the relationship too, that I think is really important. And you have, as a foster parent, you do have a choice in what you think would be a good fit for your family. And I think that's
Right.
important to you, for your listeners to know. So when you go through the foster licensing process, you put in what type of child that you think would be a good fit for your family, what gender, what age range, what
Right.
number, right? And when you are called to have a child placed with you, you ask for background, and you are able to say no. It's not that any child that's sort of, that you called on, that you have an obligation or to say yes to. So depending on what's going on in your life at that
Right.
time, you can say yes or no. And one of the ways that we've trying to encourage our Muslim community get involved in is that at least get the licensing and
Right.
consider respite care, right? So respite care is when you take a child in that's placed in foster care, but the foster family needs some respite. So they're going on a vacation out of the state, and your child didn't get permission from the bio parents to go with them. Or there's a illness in the family, and the parents are called away, or they're ill themselves. It provides temporary relief. And so even during the time that I had my foster children, I had friends who became licensed and provided respite care for my family. Because you do need, as a family, also to have that safe space. Safe space in the sense that sometimes you need to have a space where it's just you and your bio
space
family.
to breathe, basically, because
Yeah,
it is
sometimes
a lot, and it's not the fault of the foster child per se.
No, absolutely not.
But you do need a time to sort of decompress,
Sure.
and then come back to it with a fresh, point of view.
Absolutely. And I think the last child that we had, it was from a family who had to go out of town for a family wedding, and it was so it was for for a long weekend. But that child also has to be placed in a home, even temporarily, that's licensed. So I encourage families that are considering it that to at least start with respite care. Muslim families start with respite care. It gives you at least an exposure without a full commitment. Because it's amazing once we welcome some of these kids into our homes, and our friends and community members met these children. I mean, I don't know what people think foster children are. They're not from another planet. It's so many. I had comments like, "Oh, he's just a normal child. Oh, he just seems like a child from the community." And yes, they are just children. They're just born in a circumstance that's different from our own children, and it's through no fault of their own. And so I think once people, connect and see, and it changes their perspective. I mean, I would liken it to if you had a close family member or a close friend who had something trying going on in their lives, would you be willing to take their children in, for a while?
Exactly. Right.
So,
no, and that's the thing. I think that what you do, not just as a foster parent, is incredible, but that you co-created the Muslim Foster Care Association. Here's my question. Can any Muslim family from around the U.S. become licensed through the Muslim Foster Care Association? Does it have branches? How do we get in touch with you?
So we are an advocacy organization. We're actually not an agency. So for anybody becoming licensed, they would have to go through a state licensing process. And if you just Google foster parenting, there's a foster care navigator that helps you find an agency that's close to you, and you have a choice between becoming licensed as a domestic foster parent or foster family, or refugee, foster parent. And you can be single and become a foster parent. You can be married and become a foster parent. You can be divorced and be a foster parent, and you can have a whole family of your own and be a foster parent. It's just during that licensing process, they want to be able. The state will determine whether, to make sure that is this environment that you're able to provide safe and nurturing for a foster child. So our organization right now is involved with private agencies, foster care agencies, and licensing agencies. And when so here's the thing: when a child comes into foster care, they're not really labeled as Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu. And so the only way that we know if Muslim foster child is in foster care is if an agency reaches out to us and says,
Right.
we have this child placed in a home, that family is looking for resources. And I'm going to give you some couple of specific examples in how we're providing support, if I may. So
Sure.
if we know a child's been placed in a home, we provide a comfort package, backpacks and school supplies. If they, since they're Muslim, maybe a small prayer rug, some prayer beads. If they're female, a hijab. Okay, just to kind of, and then a Quran if the child requests, if they're old enough to read. We have during the Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr locally, we have programs where we send out emails to the agencies and the local State Department fostering agency to say that we have this program. Tell us where the Muslim children, where they're placed, and what we do is we try to then give care packages or Eid packages where the gift card, sometimes with younger kids, dolls, toys, to have that goes to the agency, and then the agency then distributes. And the reason we don't know, I mean, some of this is the privacy issue. People don't want, we don't want to advertise, the state doesn't want to advertise where the foster children are placed. So as an organization, we do have to work with agencies and the state to try to identify who these children are. And most recently, I'll tell you, because of the work that we've been doing, creating these connections, last year when the US withdrew from Afghanistan, we had a huge influx of not only Afghan families, but Afghan unaccompanied minors. And specifically in Michigan, we had several hundred that came. And the government organization that helps these children transition, the way that they help them transition into the community was to place them in foster care. And so our organization was contacted to help with this transition. And so we helped to provide local imams that went to the facility to help to give khutbahs, we tried to find trauma-informed therapists that have Afghan background. We tried to we found volunteers that were Dari and Pashto speaking, because one of the challenges with the Afghan unaccompanied minors with it, whereas in other refugees that come, even like the Syrian refugees, one of the most recent ones, they speak Arabic. And so to be able to find Arabic speaking in the community was very easy. This was a very big challenge, and really this is where our organization really grew in terms of helping really facilitate care and transition for these children. And most of these Afghan unaccompanied minors again ended up in homes of other faiths. And again, really it's a testament to these communities that they're taking in children from other other faiths, other ethnicities. And so I think as a Muslim community, as a community, we're still so behind in not just even accommodating our own children from our own ethnicities and faith background, but opening up to children of other faiths and backgrounds. So we are indebted to these families
most definitely,
who have taken these children in. And so what we want to do and what we try and strive to do is to really provide support to them, be a resource to them. So for these Afghan children, our coordinator, she set up she helped with this kite picnic event. And then she sets up with she's been setting up cooking sessions so that these families can learn about Afghan cooking. One of our new initiatives has been, because some of these children are placed in more rural areas, and a lot of families don't know what halal meat is, where you get halal meat from. And so we're actually in the process of starting this program where we're going to help families connect them with local halal meat stores, maybe even provide some of the meat initially or supplement some of the halal meat, because it's not easy having a child that comes in. I mean, even as a Muslim foster parent, to have a child that's from a different ethnicity, learning their culture, learning their eating habits and the different foods. And so we're trying to be that resource, that connection, to help that child really best transition as they can.
And most people don't realize, but food is it's such a basic thing that if you have familiar food, a lot of anxiety does go away. You're in a new space, but even if you have that one thing, food is familiar, it goes a long way in helping ease the transition into a new environment, new family, new everything.
Well, and even in during Ramadan, setting up
Right.
iftaris for these kids to be able to move from some different facilities, different
Right.
families to come together. It's a source of comfort.
Right.
And when you have so many things of your identity, that you can't bring with you,
Right.
whatever we can do to try to give them some sense of connection to their
Right.
identity, is what we're trying to do. And primarily because it's such a hands-on type of work that we do, we are focused locally. We don't have branches in other states, but we do have agencies and other Muslim organizations from other states that do reach out to us, and oftentimes will ask for our assistance. And we do provide consulting to try to help them establish some of these things in their areas. But it's a brand new thing that we're doing, and we're learning, and we're trying to build scale and increase capacity, because the need is only increasing. And what we're trying to do really is to get the word out so that foster families see us as a resource, not as just somebody coming and meddling and telling them you should be doing this and should be doing that, but really because at the end of the day, if that child doesn't acclimate well with the family, or the family, there's too much disruption and challenges, then that child ends up being taken out and placed somewhere else. And so it's in the best interest of the child and the family to have that understanding. And what we found was in some situations where there were behavioral issues, that really all it needed was somebody to try to help translate, that lost in translation, not just language translation, but cultural translation, misunderstanding, that led to more whole families, and allowing children to be staying in the home longer, and for families to be able to manage the transition easier.
Because that's the bottom line, basically, of fostering, that child has already been through trauma of any sort. You can either say domestic, or when they're refugees, they've been through trauma. The purpose of fostering a child is to grant them stability that they don't already have. And as foster parents, that would be our job, to give them stability, no matter like how we get the support for that, to make it more stable for the foster child. And again, like I said, I think what you do through to the association is so amazing. Please tell my audience how they can get in touch with the Muslim Foster Care Association for your resources, the information, and how to be foster parents and Muslim foster parents. It doesn't matter. Like at this point, we need both. So please do let us know.
So yes. So how can you help? So we have a website, www.muslimfostercare.org. We have information on there about the different types of fostering, how to become licensed. We have a sign-up sheet for volunteering if you're in the local area. Obviously, financial support is huge for any organization to be able to provide the services that we do. Let's see. And then of course there's an opportunity to donate on the website there, and then you will have a phone number there too if anybody wants to contact us with a phone. But really, I think this is a need that's in every community, and even outside of the Muslim community in general, the foster care system is just egregiously short of good licensed foster homes. And these children are our children that have just been born into circumstances that we can't imagine. And they're just looking for a place to find safety and some space. And you'd be surprised as to how much children have the capacity and the resiliency to, if put in the right environment, can really thrive and make up those losses. And so much of it has to do with your intention. And we have to remind ourselves, especially as Muslims, our intention is always in service and as an obligation to our Creator, who has told us that this is an obligation for us to serve those that are less fortunate. And when we're given fortune and when we're given stability ourselves, that we use that for the betterment of those around us. And so, in whatever capacity, I just happened to fall into fostering. It wasn't something I was looking for, but if you're looking for community and service, there will be some aspect in your community that you can become involved in. I would just encourage you. It may be fostering, it may not be, but there's so much that you can do even outside of fostering, that you can help support foster families, because you get burnt out. It's not, it's definitely a challenge. And personally, I had to step away from fostering in order to help with grow the organization. But I'm still licensed. I still am available for respite care, and it's important that we don't lose these children.
Right. Just like we have villages for our own children, these children do deserve their own village, and that's why I'm so grateful for what you do through the association, Dr. Sameena. I mean, thank you so much for being here with us and telling us all of this integral information. And thank you to everybody who's listened in and watched us on YouTube. Y'all take care of yourself, and may peace be on you all.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much for the opportunity.